Hey, good afternoon, everybody. I'm a little hard to talk today. I'm having one of those winter colds, but the show must go on because if it's noon Pacific on a Monday, it's content chat time. And I'm super excited today that I have Robert Rose with us. And if you don't know Robert Rose, well, I'm going to make him introduce himself. But also, if you don't know Robert Rose and you're tuning into content chat, I'm a little concerned. I'm not sure why you're here, but thank you all the same. And Robert, thank you so much for joining us today to talk about fractional content and marketing leaders.
Oh, well, thank you very much for having me. I've been a fan of the podcast, a fan of yours forever. So, yeah, thanks for having me on.
So, you and I are both doing something pretty similar, which
Mm,
is we have started being fractional leaders for various and sundry organizations.
yeah,
For me, I specifically focus on content marketing, and I know you go a little bit more broadly to being a fractional CMO overall. And people are always like, wow, is there really such a demand for it? What's the reason for that? And so I thought we could maybe just start off our conversation by talking about, how content marketing has gotten to be so important, especially for these high growth technology startups, the VC backed companies, because I know you and I both have done a lot of work with those kinds of organizations because they've really embraced doing content marketing.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I mean, fractional is what the kids are dancing to these days, right? I mean, it seems to be everywhere. And really, what it is literally just rolling up our sleeves a little further than we would probably as consultants, right? So, content marketing has been a consultant heavy practice for a while, and we'll talk a little bit about, I'm sure, of that in a moment about why it's so appropriate for sort of temporary strategic or executional help. But yeah, what we've seen is that as content marketing has become just part of the fabric of marketing, right? It's just, in my latest book, one of the things that I, maybe a little too cutely say, but what I talk about is the idea that we always thought content marketing would become part of marketing and just become part of a strategic part. But what we didn't really count on was how marketing is really becoming part of content marketing, right? So when you think of marketing and modern marketing these days, it really is just how do we operate with content in a most efficient and effective way to create great customer experiences at whatever part of the journey, right? So it is a very content centric function in the business in 2024. Thus, the skill sets, the ideas, the executions, the measurement all become a little bit different than what we're used to in classic marketing. And so, as we start thinking for businesses, well, how do they sort that out? How do you sort out all of that stuff? Well, there is some level, upskilling and leveling up that needs to happen. There's certainly some technologies that need to happen. There are certainly special content structures, content strategy, all of the different aspects of things that you and I have been working on for the past decade that become much more important. But it becomes important from not from the perspective of laying out a roadmap and a strategy. It becomes like, okay, no, we actually have to do this. We actually have to roll up our sleeves and get stuff done. And I think that's why fractional has taken off in such a big way.
I totally agree. And, just in general, I feel like when I got started a million years ago in my marketing career, B2B marketing was about who could outspend each other from a
Right.
technology standpoint, who could have the biggest booth at Moscone at a big tech event,
Right.
who could hand out the best tchotchkes, right?
Yeah.
But people don't trust brands in advertising the way that they used to. So it really, to me, it's content has been what has allowed some of these brands to really maximize their budget and build relationships with people that have really helped them up their business.
Yeah. Yeah. It's that idea of enablement, right? I mean, we talk a lot in B2B marketing about sales enablement, and what that has really transformed into from a content and a marketing perspective is creating that deeper level of trust with buyers who are more than ever, and it's ad nauseum the amount of research that's been done on this, and we're sort of self-directed, committee based, account based, right? Looking at educating themselves on the change that they need or that their business needs. And so enabling those people with education, with inspiration, with vision, with entertainment in some cases, enabling those all throughout their journey, right? Not just helping, for example, if you're a CRM company, not just helping somebody become a better marketer, but helping them do their job better, do the entirety of their job better, regardless of your particular platform or your technology, becomes a focus of the B2B marketing. And thus, marketing itself becomes sort of an educational enablement platform for your customers at all parts of the journey. Thus, content becomes a central piece of it.
And what's so interesting, though, is too many marketers really think that the content strategy is that editorial calendar where you have, here's all the things that we're going to do. And that sounds ridiculous, but I'll tell you, once upon a time, I did put together an amazing content strategy with, 60 slides because, dealing with people who really wanted weedy details. And at the end of it, the person I presented it to frowned at me. And I said, "What's wrong?" And they said, "Well, where's the content strategy?" And I said, "Well, that's what I've just given you over the past hour. What were you expecting?" And they said, "Well, the calendar with what you're going to do and when." And I wanted to cry. And then I knew it was like, oh no, this is terrible.
Yeah.
So why don't we start by like setting the levels of, what does it take? How do you start a content marketing strategy from scratch? It's not just throwing a bunch of ideas and vomiting them into a spreadsheet and assigning them to
Right. Yeah. Well, that's the case, right? When you talk to most B2B content teams, marketing teams, depending on how it's structured, their content calendar is literally just a to-do list. I mean, it's not a calendar at all. It's just, the stuff that they haven't gotten to yet because of the on-demand orders that are coming in from the rest of the organization. And so, as again, I probably too cutely say, 90% of content strategy has nothing to do with the content that you create. It has everything to do with how do you collaborate? How do you get consistency? How do you create a consistent point of view across, what does the business believe? Not what does the individual writer or the VP of marketing or the head of customer service or whatever it is, not what they believe. What does the business believe and the story that they want to tell, the enablement, how do they want to transform their customers into better customers, more knowledgeable customers, more valuable customers? All of those things come to play. And so it is much more about how do you build an operation? How do you build an operation that actually operates more like a media company rather than sort of just rinse and repeat the same things over and over again? Because typically you ask sales what they want. Well, they want, a new brochure. They want a better hero image. They want a better this. They want a better that.
They want more slides for their
That's it.
PowerPoint presentation.
Exactly. And it's because, and they're not wrong necessarily, they're not wrong, but it's because the stuff that they've been given is so disconnected and not in any way cogent to what the audience needs or wants, that the brochure is a kind of the best thing they've gotten. And so that's where it comes together in terms of understanding our audience, understanding what they need at various parts of their journey, and being able to, as an institution, as a business, be able to deliver that. Now, all of a sudden, we're working together in the same direction. And at that point, figuring out what goes in the Excel spreadsheet cells for, what the title of the content is going to be, what the words are going to be, what the pretty pictures are going to be, it pretty much writes itself.
It's so much easier because if you've already agreed upon, who you're writing for and what they care about and what you can help them with, it makes it, so much easier to actually create that content and to say no to the dumb things that you get asked to do that you don't want to do.
Right. Or the duplicative things, right? I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've spoken with insurance companies, for example, and and the classic with insurance companies is they're writing blogs and ebooks and thought leadership and all around, for example, distracted driving, right? Whoa, what a horrible thing distracted driving is. And that's, you should educate. And it's with, da, 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 da. And I had one VP of content in an insurance company said, we have 45 articles on distracted driving. Why? because quite simply, it's just easier for a salesperson or somebody to go ask someone for a new ebook on distracted driving than to go figure out in our digital asset management system the other 44 articles that have already been written on distracted driving. And
That's
so
so
they just,
sad.
yeah, they just go to the easiest thing to do, which is, give me 500 words on distracted driving in 2024. Yeah, now we have 46 articles in the digital asset management system.
And none of them are going to rank, and nobody will find that
Exactly.
one ever
Right.
again either. Yeah.
That's right.
Because they all compete with each other.
Yeah.
Oy vey. And I think part of that too is that, you know, there isn't always somebody who is a trained content marketer who is, you know, put in charge of content marketing. In early stage startups, there might not even be a head of marketing. So let's talk a little bit about that. In the work that you've been doing primarily with early stage companies, you know, where's the marketing coming from?
Well, it's coming from everywhere, right? I mean, you know, and my background was, you know, as an early stage startup, you know, I did the typical Silicon Valley 2 rounds of funding, was the CMO and head of product for that company. And so I lived it where everybody was in marketing, right? All 12 of us, and then it was 25 of us, and then it was 30 of us, and then there was 55 of us. You know, there was, as the company grew, you know, we were all doing some form of marketing because we all touched the customer at some level. And the interesting thing is that when you start thinking that through, marketing and content creation specifically, because it's everybody, and there's usually one, maybe two, maybe a handful of people that are in marketing. Well, content and marketing is, you know, that's job number 363 of the things that I have to do as a product manager or the CEO or the founder of the company or this chief revenue officer or whoever it is in this small company. It's like, yeah, I'd love to be able to blog, but you know, I got to go to this conference. I got to close that deal. I got to get on that demo. I got to figure it out. You figure it all out, right? So it's, the business just has a hard time keeping up with creating anything, much less a sustained, consistent level of content that is going to feed their audience's needs.
And Carmen Hill, who I've worked with on a number of projects, you know, mentions,
Oh
of
yes,
course,
amazing.
you know, and then the governance of all that duplicated content that everybody's creating pell mell. It's no one's job.
That's right. That's right. It becomes everybody's, you know, as I've said before, content strategy is everybody's job and nobody's strategy, right? I mean, it becomes everybody's supposed to do it, but it becomes nobody owns it in the organization. Thus, it becomes just the squeakiest wheel gets oiled, and you just sort of, it's always in triage mode. You're always sort of, you know, trying to solve things in an emergency. And we didn't do that. We didn't do that. You know, our monthly webinar, what are we going to talk about? I don't know. Let's figure it out. And you're figuring out the monthly webinar 3 days before you're supposed to go live with it. And it never ends up great because you're never planning.
That's right. It's that random act of content.
Yes.
And we know exactly how all those go.
Indeed.
But what I think ends up happening though is, let's say all of a sudden a few pieces of content take off, then somebody somewhere decides, hey, well, we need somebody to put together a content strategy, and, you know, let's hire a content marketing manager and have them create a strategy and build out our program. And what's always fascinating, of course, and having been somebody who's been brought in to, hey, let's build a global content team. Okay, great. You do all of that great work for the first year or so. You build the team, you hire the people, you train them, you get in all the technology. And then I don't know about you, Robert, but then I would get really bored. After that first year of hitting all those goals, doing all the things, like the maintenance mode part of it, oh, geez. So boring.
Yeah.
And I don't think people understand that what you do up front in order to get a content strategy, to get that buy-in, to get that understanding, all that stuff documented, is not what the job is for running content marketing forever.
It's true. It is a very different skill set. I mean, and that's where the fractional thing comes in, which is when we start to look at solving the content problem in marketing. And this goes to content marketing, which is classically going to be thought leadership or entertaining or inspiring or content that is basically valuable outside of our product or service. And then you've got marketing content, which of course is the brochures and the landing pages and the web copy and the email copy and all of those things. And by the way, those things are there's a Venn diagram there. There's definitely overlap and all of those things. And increasingly, the same people are in charge of all of it. And so when you start thinking that through, the classic in a small company, and especially in a startup company, is, well, do you hire a subject matter expert who does care about the content and isn't going to be bored once you get to the sort of
Yep.
ongoing maintenance? Or do you hire someone who's really good at creating a content marketing approach? And, it's hard because there are arguments to be made on both. And so what you start to try and look for is somebody, well, who's not only good at SEO, but also good at storytelling, but also good at measurement, but also good as a subject matter expert, but also good. And that becomes a unicorn that becomes impossible to find.
Yep.
And so you have a lot of people who are working hard. I mean, and it's not that they're not working hard, but they're working hard at things that they're not good at, that are things like creating the collaborative environment, creating the governance, creating the workflow, creating the SEO, creating the meta tagging strategy, helping implement a content management system, all of those things, which are very niche skills and only needed at very specific times. And you're trying to find one or two people to encompass all of that. And it just becomes really difficult.
And the same thing happens when they're even thinking about having that marketing leader. Because when you have a tiny team, even if you have that round of funding, they'll be like, okay, let's hire a CMO. And it's like, but you don't even have a marketing department. What on earth, is that poor CMO going to do?
Right. That's a great point. It's a great point. Yes. Yes. I mean, you can occasionally find the CMO who will roll up their sleeves and get to work, as well as sort of command, and look, the early days of a startup company, and this is mostly true in tech these days, but it's true in just about every vertical. But the early CMO is usually someone that you want to bring a little bit of flash to your organization, right? In other words, they're bringing their personal brand, their network, to whatever degree they have some rep in the industry itself. Same with a CMO, or same with in many ways your CRO, someone who's been there, done that, right? And has a little bit of street cred, so that when you're talking to all these new clients, or you're trying to close business, there's a level of trust there set by this new person. But exactly to your point, those people are usually not the people who like push buttons, open up files, get into Illustrator, get into PowerPoint, and actually, do things like that.
So I think this is a good point for us to kind of do a little bit of a deep dive into then what, a fractional CMO or a fractional content marketing leader actually does, because it has become a big part of what I do. And I mean, it's just nice that now there's like a way to explain it, because before it's like, well, I'm, the head of content for like 3 companies right now. And people will be like, but wait, what? Are you their employee? And I'm like, oh gosh, no, please. No, definitely not. They're like, but you're managing people, you're hiring people, you're doing all these things. I'm like, yes, but.
Yeah. But yeah, the but is exactly right. So it's funny. The way I think about it is, there is a life cycle, and the life cycle of implementing a great content strategy. There are, so if you look, and it doesn't necessarily take a year, but think about it over the course of a year, where you're new, you have the very basics, but you have zero content strategy, you have zero content marketing strategy. Maybe you have some marketers that are creating content. There's nothing in the way of process. There's nothing in the way. So it's basically starting with a blank slate.
Yep.
If you start to think about that for a moment, you go, okay, what's the life cycle for us to get to a year later, where we're managing stuff, we've got an engine, we've got a team, we've got a group doing stuff, and it's all organized, it's being measured, we know what we're doing, and we're just in sort of growth, or we're ready to step on the gas pedal, basically. So that process, there's a big lump in the middle, in the first third of that middle, which is, you need people to think through all the things that you just talked about, right? The SEO, the meta, the governance, the workflow, the technology, the operations, the standards, what we're going to create in the way of playbooks, the way, our story. There's all those things that take very special niche skills that you're only going to need for those, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8 months.
Yeah,
And then after that, theoretically, the organization should be taught to fish, right? The organization
exactly.
should learn how to fish. So that's why Fractional can make a really great application there, because it's like, I can bring someone in as the head of content for 3, 6, 8, 12 months while I stand up this new organization. The fractional leader there can not just do the job, but can actually teach the organization how the job is done, so that when it does require either an ongoing part-time head of content or an ongoing full-time head of content, because you've
Yep,
grown the organization and you've grown the team to such an extent it needs one, well, now you've identified the right areas and you've identified the right places, and you've meanwhile, you know, put your finger in all the holes in the dam that are leaking in the meantime, and built a really solid strategy. So those niche skills are the best places to apply that sort of idea, and leadership across that organization is a great place to apply it sort of as a meta layer, if you will, like a head of content or fractional CMO, if you will. And that's why, by the way, I call myself a fractional marketing leader, not a fractional CMO, because in many cases, to your earlier point, it's not about a CMO. It's about someone
yep,
who can come in and be behind the scenes and not have a big flashy title, but just be someone who can get some shit done.
totally. And, my background is really, integrated communications. I always owned like the PR and the comms and the
Perfect
content.
example. It's a
So
great
the
example. Yeah,
same
it's a
thing with
great
me.
example.
Because people, especially in smaller organizations, they can't have, even a director level person necessarily for all those different roles. They need somebody who understands how all this stuff works together.
100%.
Um, and that's how they figure out then what they do need for the full time. So that I think that is a really, really important factor to think about.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
in your working both, as having, been a consultant, having been in-house, and now doing some of these fractional marketing leadership roles, how do you counsel companies, founders, and the leadership team on how to decide if the fractional role is going to work for them, or if they really do need to just bring in somebody that, maybe is more junior and can learn on the job? Because it seems like people either are dead set on one way or the other about what actually works. Because I've seen a lot of situations where people have hired in somebody to kind of, step into that role who hasn't done it before, and they're miserable because they don't have a mentor, they don't have the frameworks, et cetera. So, how can companies really make the right decision?
It's about looking at what you've identified is sort of the overarching business strategy that is in place, right? So in my experience, when you talk to a company, and this is again usually in the early stage startup, or even let's call it mid-stage startup, right? Series A, Series B, even Series C. What you've got is a group of founders. And typically these founders are going to come to the table with a certain skill set, right? They're either come out of the industry that they're innovating in, or they've been professionally assembled by, a venture capital firm or some other, or they're just a bunch of friends who decided to try something, right? So in either event, you can sort of look at what you have, right? So for example, I'm working with one organization now. They had a fantastic salesperson, an amazing chief revenue officer, just an amazing person, right? Who understands sales, understands how to network, understands how to build a sales plan, understands how to manage salespeople, came from that industry, knows the language, knows the jargon, knows what they're doing, but doesn't know anything about marketing. They have a CEO who is an engineer, and the CEO is completely technical, knows the software backwards and forwards, knows how to speak to it, very charming, very engaging, but knows nothing about marketing. And they go, do we hire a CMO, or do we hire someone who can help us sort out marketing?
Yeah.
I would argue that they made the right decision by making a fractional decision, because they don't, at this point in their world, they don't need a big flashy CMO to come in and lead a big team. They just don't need that. What they need is the basic blocking and tackling of creating a marketing operation.
Yeah.
And so that basic blocking and tackling of a marketing operation might be one, it might be two people, again, coming back to those specialized niche skill sets. It might be three people at a fractional level to build sort of a virtual or a fractional marketing team to work together, do that basic blocking and tackling, and understand where they are in a way that doesn't commit them. One of my board members, when I was a CMO of a startup, amazing guy, and he gave me some of the best advice that I've ever heard. He said, Robert, the only expensive thing you'll ever do as a founder of a startup company is hire somebody. He said, go to golf, go to dinner, fly to Paris overnight, whatever it is. Those are not expensive things. Hiring somebody is the most expensive thing that you'll do. So do it carefully. Do it really, really carefully. And so that can be a great way to sort of judge whether you want to hire somebody. If you find somebody that's an expert in the industry and you love and the chemistry is fantastic, 100% get them on your team immediately. But in the meantime, a fractional or sort of outsourced, if you will, or a consultative approach can be the best way to get some of your basic blocking and tackling in place that can help you sort of propel forward without having to make that level of investment.
I think that's really important, and we are getting some comments and questions. And folks, we are going to save some time at the end because we will get to all your questions. So thank you, Maureen and Andy, especially for your questions and comments. Appreciate those. But before we kind of move on here, I would love to get your perspective, Robert, on just some of the kinds of opportunities that companies have really to really better connect with their buyers by creating content, and some things that, by bringing on that fractional person, some of those kind of early wins that people don't necessarily think about. Because especially in the startup world, everybody wants that quick win. What is something that we can do in the first 2 weeks, Robert?
Yeah. Well, you know what the stock answer to that is, and every marketing person out there is about to smile. Fix the website. Of course, you got to fix the website. That's the first thing, right? It's always the first thing. Oh, you got to fix your website. Fix the logo. Fix the website. But I tease. I think the earliest win, truly, is figuring out the story. Like, what is the story? Both, and when I say story, I mean not only the sort of core value proposition, the competitive advantage, the differentiator that you have in the market, but the story. Like, what do you believe about the world that you're going to change the world becomes this sort of center of gravity for your content marketing approach, and finding where those two things meet as sort of the center of everything you're going to focus on from a content perspective. That it can be done very quickly. I mean, it can take a long time if you've got a lot of research to do, but that sort of story strategic planning is if you can get to the core of that, which sometimes means, yes, fixing the website or fixing the logo or the tagline or the colors and those sorts of things. But mostly what it means is changing the messaging that you've got going on, right? Because what you've done as an early stage founder team is to slap a bunch of stuff up that you thought looked good from your competitor's website. And it's, yes, great, fantastic. It's closing a few deals, but you found that sort of low hanging fruit is now getting harder to find because leads are getting harder. You ran through your network of former clients and you're really trying to get new business in the door, and you got to get that story straight. That's the first thing I would absolutely focus on in any, is just making sure that what we're saying is good, consistent, differentiated, and is compelling, because otherwise everything else is just decoration.
I'm right there with you. And I'll tell you that the absolute first thing I did, even when I was at Highwire, running their content business for a year, the very first thing I would do when we would onboard any client there is do a brand voice exercise. And it has to have, all the different leaders in the room. The CEO has to be there to find that brand voice, because if you haven't done that and figured out how they're different from their competition, then how on earth can you create differentiated content?
That's
and
right.
Especially now with people using AI, if you don't have your brand voice defined and you're using AI, what kind of trash content are you going to be creating?
That's right.
I mean, come on.
And how much money are you wasting in paid spend? How much money are you wasting in paid social? How much money are you wasting in all of the PR efforts that you've got going on? If you don't have the right story and the right content and the right differentiator and value proposition, all the rest of that is just, you're just throwing money against the wall. And if you can get that figured out, then yes, there are probably triage things that, I've never walked into any company that didn't have sort of a burning challenge, like something that they need, like whether it was a sprint to get some leads in the funnel, they've got a customer loyalty or a churn issue. They've got, a brand awareness issue. There's a reason that there's a reason that marketing comes to the top of the pot boiling over, right?
Yep.
And so whatever that reason is the number 2 quick win. But if you don't have the first one down and sort of set, then the rest doesn't matter.
Totally. So keep your questions coming in the comments, because we're going to start taking those in a few minutes. But before we do, I thought we could do a quick little dispelling some myths about being a fractional marketing leader. And I'll let you go first, but I have some too, because there's some myths that I think persist around, the idea of, oh, really, how could you possibly do this kind of strategic work, as a part-time fractional person with other clients? How is that possible?
Yeah, well, I'll give you, I don't know if this is a myth or not, but it's, I think we're pretty young to get into some really, some true myths about the industry. But I will say this, which is, it's not always about someone who can be front and center to lead the team. And here's what I mean by that. I find that there are 2 distinct flavors of the fractional services. One is what I call, you're hiring someone to serve the role of CMO or head of marketing or head of content or chief content officer or content marketing, whatever it is, right? You're going to become part of the team. They're going to put your name and headshot up on their website, that, the whole thing, right? You are becoming part of the public facing part of that team. Then there's what I call the best kept secret idea, which is you are literally just an advisor to the CEO or the CMO. Maybe they hired a CMO and the CMO is like struggling a little bit. And so you can bring in sort of a head of marketing, head of content, fractional person to be that person's Cyrano de Bergerac, right? To basically help them, advise them, and be sort of in the background. And so it's one of those things where it doesn't have to be, especially if you already have a publicly facing marketing team, it doesn't have to be someone who replaces them or is the boss of them. It can be someone who's literally just in the background, helping them to be the best version of themselves. One of my clients, it's a small client of mine, is a big CRM provider. And I'm literally just in the background helping the content marketing person there navigate the politics and everything that they're doing, and basically navigate what it is that they have to do as part of their job, because they're young and this is their first big management job, and they just need some help, and the company recognized they need a little help, and all I'm there to do is help, sort of provide some of that advisory role.
You're like a paid mentor. It's amazing.
It's that kind of thing, right? It's like but it's all in the background. It's all and so that, I think, is one of the keys to understand the sort of mentality that you can take there.
I do always joke that frequently the reason I get rehired by clients multiple times everywhere they go is the marketing therapy service that I provide. Because there is so much of it where you need to have that person, right?
100%.
Who understands, who feels their pain.
100%.
And I think, that's
and I find that that's actually more true with not as true with it's becoming more true with the startup companies, but that sort of background advisor, best kept secret idea is one of the most primary ways that I see engaging with larger organizations, right? Larger organizations, even marketing leadership or marketing middle management aside, it is, because they're not hiring. I mean, big companies are not hiring fractional CMOs. They're just not. No. For the most part, but they are hiring those sort of, as you said, paid mentors kind of advisors.
Yeah. And because really, unless you have a really huge organization, you're not going to have 5, 6, 7 layers of content people where each one is learning from the person, 1 step above. I mean, I've worked at exactly one place that was like that, and that was Schwab. And that
Yeah.
was, you know,
Oh, I know Schwab.
I know you do. And that's just like, that's an unusual circumstance. Usually you're going to end up with, there's one person who does this role and they're trying to learn as much as they can, but you can only do so much from a self-directed standpoint.
Exactly right.
You need to
That's
have
exactly
a
right.
person that you can, mine for experience and ask questions to.
Yeah.
Um, I would say the one thing I would add, the biggest myth I've run into is there are people who feel really strongly, especially on the internet where we all feel strongly about things and find hills to die on. Um, they're like, it's impossible. You can't possibly do content strategy as an external person. Who would ever hire an external person to come in and do that?
Yeah.
And that to me is always hilarious because actually it's better because the external person's going to come in and ask questions and not have a bunch of their own biases and is going to be able to figure things out without the politics getting in the way because they're literally being hired to do the thing. They're not being
It's
hired to
it
become friends.
it is such an important point. I mean, so I've been doing content strategy as a service, as a consulting service for 15 years. And in every single case, when we're doing content strategy, governance, workflow, change management, all of the elements around changing the operations of a marketing or content organization to change up the way that they actually manage and measure and optimize their content. It has always been better for us to have been an outside, and in many reasons, it's the reason we're hired.
Yeah.
So there's very often the case when we go in to visit with a client and they say, we know what the answer is. And we go, okay, great. What's the answer? Well, the answer is X and Y and Z. And you go, well, that's exactly the answer. They go, yeah, we just need you to say it. And so, and we're happy to say it. Right. And so it is, but interestingly enough, what I've also found over the last 15 years, it's really easy to say it. And it's really easy to get heads nodding in a room. And it is Herculean to get them to actually implement that change. I mean, it is, because it's not easy. And it comes back to all those niche skills that we just talked about, that sort of big hump that you have to get over of implementing a content strategy. It's the hardest part. It's the absolute hardest part. It's not the road mapping. It's not the strategy. It's not the journey mapping. It's not the persona development. It's implementing that into the institution is the hardest part of all of this.
And it's the most fun.
It is totally the most fun. It can be the most fun, right? If it's,
If you love
politics aside, right? Politics aside, it can definitely be the most fun.
So I love all of that. I'll also say, I don't know, have you done very much work with the executive team where you end up doing some of that kind of like thought leadership development with them and like the helping them figure out what their thought leadership platform is? Because I'd say that's another thing that people think of as being, oh, you got to be that internal person. But I am assuming you've probably done a lot of that work too. And, really is being, again, that external validation. I think it can be useful to be outside of the everyday work.
Yeah, from us. So one of the courses that I teach is on sort of business storytelling and getting to compelling narratives and how to do the sort of a roadmap of how to do that or how to think about that. Do that a lot. I would say for actually coming up with the thought leadership, it's very I'm very limited. I'll put it that way in terms of so professional services. So consulting firms, big consulting firms or big IT shops, I'm good at because of my background.
Yep.
Technology companies, I can do that because of my background and my knowledge and depth of knowledge of the technology industry. And media companies, I can do that.
Yep.
Anybody, healthcare, I'm as lost as sort of I'm just a kindergartner and I just don't know anything. Right.
The highly regulated industries are always just like, oh my goodness.
I just don't know the topic. I don't know the content very well. So it's really hard for me to be prescriptive when it comes to a thought leadership platform or all of those kinds of things.
But I think that's also a really good point, is that you can find a fractional marketing leader who has that industry background that you need, who will understand things from that perspective. And,
Totally.
you know, I think it's actually pretty easy to find people who have the right backgrounds.
Right. Well,
I
yeah,
mean,
you can throw a rock now and hit a fractional somebody. Yeah. I mean,
it's a
it's
little popular right now.
it's a
Yes.
little bit popular at the moment. Yeah. It's the thing, right? Especially in technology, you know,
Yeah.
it's a thing.
But it's really just about finding that person who has the right skills, who has that right background. So that way, whatever your problem is, and that's obviously you're hiring somebody because you have a problem. So, figuring out what that problem is, I think then you can definitely find somebody who's going to come in and get things done. Because I
Yeah.
don't know about you, I always am concerned if I'm hiring a writer, for example, and you ask what their area of expertise is, and they say, "Oh, I can write about anything. You just give
Yeah.
me an SME, I can write about anything." And I'm like,
Yeah.
"Oh
No.
no."
No. I mean, look, there is something to that, right? Um, I used to operate back in the day, and I would say, there's that classic. I don't remember where this came from, but I use it all the time as a metaphor, and I don't even know if it's true. By the way, it could be total urban legend, but there was a trope that used to go around UPS where they said basically, we don't hire drivers and teach them how to be customer service people. We hire customer service people and teach them how to be drivers.
Yep.
And I think there's something to that, right? I found when I was a CMO that I would much rather hire strategic people and I would teach them the world of web content. We were enterprise web content management as a
Yep.
software solution and cloud computing, and all of that. So my attitude was, I just want good people who can write, create, and are strategic. And then I can teach them all the vagaries of, enterprise content management and cloud computing and all of those kinds of things. But having said that, I don't think you can just step in and become, especially in very specialized
Yeah.
niche places. You don't want just anybody writing something on healthcare, or
Yeah.
the Cleveland Clinic, and Amanda Todorovich, the amount of care and feeding that they put into the content and who writes the content for them for their health essentials blog and for all the things that they do is, you want proper credentialed people writing that stuff.
Yeah. And I think, again, that's what's so interesting about the fractional aspect is that you'll be able to find somebody who has both the
Totally.
technical skills and the subject matter expertise. And that's something that is going to be so much harder to find in a full-time employee.
Totally.
So
Right.
it
Yeah.
really,
Or it's two people, right? It may be two people,
yeah,
right? For the
or
price of
more.
one. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Right.
Because
Exactly.
we've all had those jobs where we've been replaced by 3 people after we've left, and you've been like, "Oh my goodness."
That's right. That's right.
Well, I'm gonna, start diving through our questions because 'cause we've got
Sure.
about 15 minutes left, and I'm gonna start with, Maureen. Maureen had, a question for us
Maureen.
about
What's up,
how
Maureen?
how do you manage the fine balance between ensuring content quality and being a roadblock to content generation? And I think we've all been in that situation where it's like, done is better than perfect, but
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and the place where I see that most is in there's the quantity versus quality idea. And we talked at some length in the beginning about sort of becoming a more strategic organization, right? Where the content team isn't just an on-demand vending machine of stuff coming from the intranet, right? Where there's, like I need an ebook and I need a blog post and I need this. And of course that's not so insert content strategy. So assuming we have a content strategy inserted there and that the content team is leading that, one of the things that I find that is really helpful there is you start putting that very considered priority story development insertion into the workflow where you're prioritizing, you're deep diving in, and you're basically understanding what the core story is before you even think about its container, right? Before we even start even to think about whether it's going to be a PDF file or a PowerPoint or a video or a podcast episode or, whatever it's going to be. What's that core story so that it can be transformed into multiple outputs? And the pushback on that is always, and I've gotten it so many times, the pushback from whoever it is will say, wow, that sounds like you're going to really slow things down in terms of the content creation process. And I say, yep, I'm absolutely going to slow it down. It is going to slow to a painful crawl. I said, but what I'm more than going to do is exponentially increase your production speed and your capabilities. Because now the production people aren't going, oh, I need to unwind this whole Illustrator file to be able to do this story over here. And, oh, I need to be able to find, oh, we did a customer interview, but nobody bothered to shoot video while they were interviewing the customer. And, oh, nobody bothered to actually record audio of the customer because we wanted to put it on. Nope, nobody bothered to X, Y, and Z during the content creation process because nobody thought about all the different ways that we might be able to leverage it.
Yep.
So taking that extra time to think about the depth of the story and all the different ways we want to express that story, even if you don't end up using it all, exponentially speeds up your production process and your reuse and repackaging of content.
Yep.
So that it can be reused across multiple channels. And that really starts to pay off. It's a hard thing to get done, but once you get it done, it really pays dividends.
I'm so with you on that as well. When you put together those templates and those frameworks, and they're reminding people that having that idea for something, you always have to be thinking through, how are you reusing it? I always try to have every single customer interview be a video recording, even if it's just Zoom, because you're going to want at least a couple of those snippets for social. If it's really good, you're going to want the whole thing for a 3-minute video cut. And you have to get a transcript because you want to have things be in the customer's voice, not just be some salesperson regurgitating what the customer said through the brand lens.
Right.
That's so boring.
That's right. If you've got somebody on your team right now who is taking screenshots of the graph in your awesome, cool research project, but they have to take screenshots of the graph to post it on Facebook or LinkedIn or Twitter or wherever, you're doing it wrong, right? Because all of that should have been figured out beforehand, and there should be a special version of the graph for the thing that's going to go on Facebook. There's a special version of this infographic from this research report that's going to be available for LinkedIn, and so on and so forth. Thinking all that stuff through, yeah, it absolutely slows things down, but it more than speeds up the fact that now we're throwing screenshots up, in the middle of the thing, and it looks crappy and it's awful and the quality's not great, but it was the only way that social media person could actually get it done, because otherwise it means opening up Illustrator and finding the graphic and finding the designer who did it, and it's not well documented in the digital asset management system, and it takes more time, and it's just thrash.
100%. So we had some back and forth with Maureen and Andy Robinson about, how do you kind of, what's the conversation or the starter for the conversation to have with the leadership team to understand, some of the things they're going to have to do up front when they bring on that content leader. So, in some cases, it may be that you're starting with nothing. And so, there can be the conversation around helping them understand what it looks like to start from nothing. But as Andy brings up, even harder sometimes is when there are some pieces parts and there are some people who are in roles that maybe they shouldn't be in. It can actually take even longer to unwind and untangle. And I'm not going to say what I would say if we were in person, because I'm trying to swear less, but you can imagine what I would say to you in person over a cocktail, to undo the things that have been done not so well. It can actually, that can be pretty tough too. So, how do you help guide that conversation?
I know exactly what word you want to use too. It's so funny. It's so funny. Look, the hardest part is, and when we talked earlier about the change management stuff and implementing, the hardest part is unwinding the thing. Here's one piece of advice that has worked for me, which is you've got all these things that you're going to change, and they are change. It's the way, when you're unwinding something, you're changing the way that Bob or Jim or Mary did his or her job, and they don't like it. They're probably unhappy about it because they're like, things work fine for me at the moment. I don't love the way they happen, but I'm at least comfortable with it. I know how it's done. But you need to do it because it's better for the business. It's better for the process. It's better for the governance structure. It's better for everything. One thing that I've found that's helpful is, first of all, starting small, don't try and rip it all off at the same time. Starting small, one part of the buyer's journey, one content type, one division, one group, whatever segment is the more cross-functional, the better, but basically one part of it. The second thing is, when you position it, don't position it as change, position it as new. It's a new, when we position things as change to people, the unwinding part, when we position things as change to people, it suggests that everything they're doing now is wrong.
Yeah.
And so they immediately have a negative reaction to it. When we position it as new, it means we're going to try this new thing and see if it works better. And then so say, we just want you to try it this way because it's new. And that can help sort of smooth over some of that change management. Is what we're doing is we're implementing a new process, a new workflow, a new platform, a new piece of content, a new story, not a change, not all of that, and see how it works and start to set foundational elements and just say, listen, is this working better? No, it's not working better. Let's change it back. We can always change it back. So let's figure out where, one of the things that we always talk to clients about is to say, look, we want to understand, in the old days, we would say tribal knowledge. We don't say tribal knowledge anymore. We say occurrent processes. The occurrent processes are like how shit really gets done, not what the manual says, not what the documentation says, not what the PowerPoint say, but like how it's that classic when you sort of get hired in your first day and they go, I know the manual says you're supposed to call Mary for this thing. Don't call Mary. She doesn't know what she's doing. You're actually supposed to call Jim. Jim is the receptionist. He's going to get it done for you, right? It's that kind of stuff, right? Yeah. How to mapping those things out and then understanding if they're working. And if they're working, even if it's kind of inefficient, maybe we don't break it. Maybe it's okay. That's the real key, is really understanding where we want to push and pull on the levers of change and position it as new.
Totally. And Andy brings up a good point. I don't know about you, but I've played the bad guy on more than a few occasions. Like when you come in and something's just not right, and then you're the one who uncovers what it is, and you're the one who shares it. So that way the people that have to work with that person every day doesn't have to step in it. Or,
totally.
Frankly, I several times I've been in that situation where you come in, things don't look right, and then you're like, oh, you know why things don't make sense? Because all of the metrics in the reporting each month, they're made up. I actually couldn't find them anywhere. These are somebody's just putting numbers into a spreadsheet, and nobody thought to check the systems of record.
Yeah.
And yes, in that situation, the person quit. So it kind of resolved itself.
The worst version of that is when you come into a situation, fractional consulting, otherwise new employee, whatever it is, and you realize the person who brought you in, they're the problem. It's this horrible realization. Usually comes on a Friday, after a few emails going back and forth, and you're like, I just realized my client is actually the problem in this organization.
What do you do though? I mean, that's when you're like, are they rehabilitatable?
It's when you pour yourself a big tequila, my friend, is what you do, is you pour yourself a very large tequila and you take the weekend.
Yes. It's like, can this client relationship be saved?
Yeah.
Sometimes. We have, I think, time for one last question.
Sure.
And I see from Carmen, she would love some tips, if you have some, for cost-effective video capture on projects that are not video first. So specifically, having, I think I know what she's talking about here is, sometimes you work on projects, including case studies, where you don't have a production team that you can send out to, go and capture it. But you do want to have some video as part of what you're doing, because you know 100%. That that's engaging. So what are some ways to actually make it happen?
My favorite thing to do is, look, iPhones take great video. They just do. They're just great at it. What they're not great at is sort of rack focus and being able to, all those kinds of things. So two things. One is iPhone on a tripod is underrated. It can be a great and shoot it horizontally so that you have the choice of being able to zoom in or not. Two iPhones if you can do it, one vertical, one landscape. And because you don't worry about the audio, you're just looking for video at that point, right? You're going to capture audio separately. And then what you don't forget about is the B-roll stuff, right? Shoot the beginning of the door, the logo at the front of the office, the landing the plane, the restaurant where everybody went for dinner, the whole thing, because the voiceover of your person, as you sort of show the building and show the B-roll and all that kind of stuff, can be just as powerful, right? Just with some words and stuff like that over the top of it, can be just as powerful. Now, of course, you want the picture of the person to the extent you can and the direct interview with the person, but you don't need to worry about getting them all laved up, meaning a lavalier microphone and all that kind of stuff. If you can just get some video of them talking, literally you can have them voiceover as they're sort of speaking to someone off camera like this, and then the voiceover is doing something completely different and words are coming in. You can get some really great video for no effort.
Totally. And have you used any of the, any AI tools or any of the like fun, I guess they're animation kind of tools. Unfortunately, all the ones that I ever used seem to have gone out of business or be sucked into other big companies.
Yeah. I used to use, I can't remember what it was called, Video Scribe I used to use, which was pretty good. It was just hard. I found it was so time consuming to do those things, to do those explainer videos with, like the little hand drawing the picture or whatever it was and all that kind of stuff, cartoons and stuff like that. It's just, I hire a designer for that.
Yeah, unless you're Ann Handley, her hand-drawn little cards that she does sometimes for webinars, I am always
well,
so
100%.
impressed.
But we're not Ann Handley.
No,
right?
we're not.
Yeah, that's just
No one is Ann Handley except for Ann. Hi,
That's
Ann,
it.
we love
That's
you.
it.
Well, Robert, thank you so much for spending this hour with us and sharing your thoughts. I'm hopeful that this has kind of demystified the fractional
I hope it
marketing
is too.
for folks. But where can people find you, and share a little bit about your book, because I've been recommending it to people.
Aren't you sweet? Yes, the book is Content Marketing Strategy. It is out, and it's where you get all your favorite books, wherever you like to get books. If you're interested in looking at it directly or seeing, all of the assets and everything with it, I have a little website at contentmarketingstrategy.com. My little cave on the internet is contentadvisory.net. And then, of course, more on my fractional stuff is robertrose.net. I use the .net because it's the dad genes of domains. So there we have it.
Well, it could be worse. It could be .media or one of the other long tail domains.
I was slow to the game to get my own name. So there was a jeweler named Robert Rose that got it first. And,
that is always so disappointing when you can't get it first.
Yeah.
And any speaking engagements where folks can
I am actually, yes. I'll be next week. I'll be in actually this week. Sorry, I'm in Chicago at the Digital Summit. I'll be speaking there on AI and workflow and governance. And
fun! That's one of my favorite topics. I love
sexy topic. Yeah, I got to tell you.
Well, thanks everybody, and we'll catch you again next week. Bye, everyone.